بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما تعلمنا وزدنا بفضلك من فضلك علما وتعليما اللهم فقهنا في الدين وعلمنا التأويل وصل اللهم وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين وبعد Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. As I mentioned before, I'm happy to be back, alhamdulillah. And we are on our second to last discussion on Get to Know the Qur'an. And today, what we're going to be speaking about is the miraculous nature of the Qur'an, the i'jaz al-Qur'an, as well as the eloquence of the Qur'an, which is directly related to its i'jaz, its miraculous nature. So when we look at the Qur'an, of course, as we've stated in previous discussions, it is a book of belief where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is informing us of who He is, informing us about His prophets and His messengers and other matters of the unseen, informing us about the Day of Judgment, informing us about stories of previous communities, informing us about His different rulings in our actions and our behaviors, etc., etc. So the content of Islam, what it means to be a Muslim, is all in the Quran. It's our reference and it's our guide. But also, the Quran is the primary miracle of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent prophets and messengers. And we are obligated to follow them. So we are a part of what's called Ummatul Da'wah. We are the community that is being called to. We have a responsibility to respond to that call. The call of our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And in obligating that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not make it so there's nothing to substantiate the claim. Anybody can claim to be a prophet. Anybody can do that. So how is it that those of us that are receiving a call, an invitation from someone who's claiming to be a prophet, how do we know that that person who's making the claim is telling the truth? How do we tell the difference between a true prophet versus a false prophet? It's the mu'jiza, an inimitable miracle. This is what Allah has given us in order to give us the discernment of who is telling the truth when they claim to be a prophet sent by Allah. So this is properly spoken about in Aqidah. So we're not going to go into the details here about what's called Dalalatul Mu'jiza, how the Mu'jiza signifies the truthfulness of the claimant of prophethood. You'll have to join the Aqidah class to get the details about that. But what we want to focus on is how the Quran is a Mu'jiza. So the ulama, they mention two main considerations for how the Quran is a mu'jiza. The first is the fasaha, the eloquence of the Quran, and the second is the nadam, the structure or composition of the Quran. So when you put those two things together, you have something that cannot be produced by a human being or a jinn. So neither human beings or the jinn can come with the like of the Quran when you put those two affairs together. Al-fasaha wa nadam. So if someone comes with some Arabic poetry that is extremely eloquent, have they met the challenge of the Quran? Have they come with the like of the Quran? No. Why? What's missing? The nadam is missing. If someone imitates the nadam of the Quran, and this has been done historically by Musaylama al-Kadhab, where he said, al-fil mal-fil, wa ma adraka mal-fil. That's an imitation of the style of the Quran. But in doing that, did Musaylama al-Kadhab, the great liar, did he come with the like of the Quran? No. Why not? Because even though he copied the style, he was missing the what? He was missing the eloquence, the fasaha. But to the contrary, he had what's called rakaka. Rakaka, meaning it's bad, poorly put together language. Right? Rakaka is the opposite of fasaha. Right? So I can't come with the exact same structure of the Quran, but there's rakaka, and then say, I've imitated the Quran. Nor can I come with a different form of speech, whether it be poetry or prose, or what's called saj'a, rhymed prose in Arabic. And even though I have the fasaha, I haven't met the structure of the Quran. The Quran has a unique composition. It's in a genre of its own. So when those are together, we have the miracle of the Quran. And there's different aspects that the scholars look at that indicate the fact that there is i'jaz. I'jaz literally means to incapacitate, right? Comes from ajz, right? So i'jaz is idhar al-ajz. Idhar al-ajz. It's where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is manifesting, is showing our incapacity, our inability to come with its like. And again, that's understood to be in the eloquence and the style or structure. And there are 5 ayats in the Quran that are called ayat at-tahaddi. Ayat at-tahaddi, the ayat of challenge, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala challenges disbelievers, challenges skeptics to come with the like of the Quran. And it's the absence of a response that shows us what? The ajz. All right, so our inability, our ajz, has been established by these verses of challenge. Right, so the first one, and everybody should be familiar with these ayats. The first is in Al-Baqarah. It's at the very beginning of the Mus'haf, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he said, وَإِن كُنْتُمْ فِي رَيْبٍ مِمَّا نَزَّلْنَا عَلَى عَبْدِنَا فَأْتُوا بِسُورَةٍ مِّن مِثْلِهِ وَادْعُوا شُهَدَاءَكُمْ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ إِن كُنْتُمْ صَادِقِينَ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he said, and this is in Al-Baqarah, the 2nd chapter of the Quran, and this is the 23rd verse. So we're looking at the 23rd and also the 24th verse of Al-Baqarah. So Allah, He said, if you are in doubt, addressing the skeptic or the disbeliever, if you are in doubt about what we have revealed to our slave, meaning to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then come with a surah that's equal to it, that's the same, min mithlihi, the same as it. And what's the shortest surah in the Quran? Al-Kawthar. Al-Kawthar, which is only 3 ayats, around 10 words. So Allah is challenging us to come with the like of Al-Kawthar. That's all it takes to disprove the Quran. All right, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is opening up the Quran to falsification. If it's not really from Allah, then we should be able to do this. Come with a surah that's the same as it. The same as in terms of what? The dominant opinion, in terms of its eloquence and its structure. Come with a surah that is the same as it, and call your witnesses besides Allah that will witness to its eloquence and to its having the same structure, being the same as the Quran. Call your witnesses besides Allah if you are being truthful. So the burden of proof is on who? It's on the disbeliever or the one that's having doubts about Islam. If Islam is false, then you bring the proof of it, meaning the like of the Quran. And if you're not able to do so, then know that it's from Allah. Why? Because of idhar al-ajz, al-i'jaz, due to the manifesting of your inability. Right? So this is very important to understand the true significance of a mu'jiza, an incapacitating miracle. The proof of the truth of Islam is where? That is a question for y'all. The truth of Islam is proven by what? Where does that proof find its reality? Any thoughts? It's within each and every one of us. But how so? By the fact that none of us can come with the like of the Quran. It's our inability. Our ajz, as we said before, is something that is established. It's proven against us. So then after that, in the next ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He said, فَإِن لَمْ تَفْعَلُوا وَلَنْ تَفْعَلُوا فَاتَّقُوا النَّارِ الَّتِي وَقُودُهَا النَّاسُ وَالْحِجَارَةُ أُعِدَّتْ لِلْكَافِرِينَ. So if you don't do it, and you will never do it, but if you don't do it and you will never do it, then fear the fire whose fuel is men and stones, people and stones, that has been prepared for the disbelievers. So here, this is actually an i'jaz within an i'jaz. Why? Because Allah said, فَإِن لَمْ تَفْعَلُوا وَلَنْ تَفْعَلُوا. If you never do it, and you will never do it. Right? So Allah again is addressing disbelievers and or skeptics. All right. So if I want to prove Islam is false, Islam is a false religion, I'm determined that this is the case, and I'm going to prove it. How do I do that? By responding to the challenge. Okay. By responding to the challenge. Has anyone ever responded to the challenge? No. And to think about how profound a reality that is, think about the enemies of Islam. From the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam up until today. During the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we're talking about the masters of Arabic. There are no deficiencies in Allah, and therefore His book cannot be deficient. Yes, our speech is deficient by nature. Right. The Quran, the eloquence of the Quran, it indicates knowledge, the knowledge of Allah. But we're going to get into that a little bit further down, inshallah. So think about the enemies of Islam from the very beginning of the da'wah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam up until now. There were masters of Arabic, the Quraysh in particular, during the time of the Prophet. They never came with the like of it. And what's the proof of their inability? The most knowledgeable people of Arabic. What is the proof of their inability? And this is something that's very important, because someone might ask the question, okay, well, I don't know Arabic. Either I don't know Arabic at all, or if I know Arabic, maybe some Arabic, I'm not proficient in Arabic enough to really appreciate how eloquent and how powerful the language actually is. So how am I supposed to appreciate the fact that the Quran is a mu'jiza from the perspective of its language? Like, what is that supposed to mean to me? How can I actually know that? Does anybody have any thoughts on the answer to that question? To put it in perspective, with Musa alayhi salam, his mu'jiza was, among his mu'jizat, was turning his staff into a real snake. And that was in a time in Egypt where magic was something that was practiced at a high level. So when Fir'aun called his magicians together and they had this demonstration, and it was meant to disprove Musa alayhi salam, what ended up happening? The magicians believed. Why did the magicians believe in Musa alayhi salam? After seeing his demonstration, they knew it wasn't magic. And they knew that they were what? Ajizun. They knew that they were incapable of producing the same thing that Musa alayhi salam produced. So if somebody in the crowd that was a witness to that event says, well, you know, I don't know magic, I'm not a magician, so I can't really understand the proof that Musa alayhi salam just presented. Does that make any sense? No, it doesn't make sense. Why? Because the magicians are the proof over the person who's ignorant of magic. Does everybody understand how that works? The fact that the experts, the masters in the field, acknowledge their incapacity, that proves that what? Me, as somebody that doesn't know how to do what the magicians do, I'm even more incapable. All right? Does everybody understand the logic of that? So when we look at the Arabs at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, yes, it's true, because Arabic was at its highest level when the Quran was revealed. It was a time of the greatest Arabic poets, yes. So the fact that the Arabs at the time of the Prophet ﷺ were not able to come with the like of it, it proves that it's what? Mu'jiza. But what's the proof that they were incapable of coming with the like of it? How do we know that they weren't able to do that? And this is a very interesting point that the scholars mention. They tried everything in their power to stop Islam. How do we know that? Because they started fighting. They went to war in an effort to stop Islam. So that means that what? They were willing to kill and be killed. They were willing to die fighting for Jahiliyyah. And they did. They fought, they killed, and they were killed for the sake of this conflict with Islam. They subjected themselves not only to the violence of war and being killed or injured, but also to being captured, to having, the destruction of property. etc., etc. So going to war is what it's a big decision to make for a community to make, right? It means it's serious, right? To put it lightly. So the fact that they went to war over Islam is a proof that they tried everything to stop Islam. But what's the one thing that they did not do? The one thing in all of their efforts to stop Islam, the one thing they did not do was what? The easiest thing, if we presume that Islam was false. The easiest thing to do is to come up with some words, to put some words together, right, to disprove the challenge. They did everything in their power to stop Islam except for the one thing that could disprove it. So that shows us that what? They were incapable. So if I don't know Arabic, I can still understand what their reaction to the Qur'an means. All right, does everybody see that? If the masters of Arabic were incapable of producing the like of the Qur'an, those of us who are not masters of Arabic are even more so incapable. So the proof, again, is within each and every one of our incapacity. The hujjah of Allah, the proof of Allah is over us. It's affirmed over us. We are ajizun. Okay? So inshallah, everybody understands not only the significance of that, but the gravity of it. So if you encounter or speak with anyone that believes Islam is false, or a Muslim, and this is unfortunate, but this is the reality that we live in, Muslims that are having doubts about Islam. If Islam is false, it means one thing. There's only one thing that can show that Islam is not from Allah. The Quran is not the words of Allah. And that is what? That a human being or a jinn, a jinni, as I should say more properly, comes with the like of it. That's the only thing to prove Islam is false. And the challenge is open. All right. So no matter how we feel about Islam, no matter how we feel about a particular hukum, a particular ruling, it doesn't matter what our personal feelings are, what our personal opinions are, what our ahwa are. The proof is against us if we cannot come with the like of it. All right. So it is very deep, as was noted. All right. So when we talk about the truth of Islam, we're not just talking about something that we just believe, okay? This is a real thing. There's real incapacity that demonstrates that it's coming from Allah. And again, to put it in the perspective of the enemies of Islam, think about in more modern times, from the 19th century up until now, think about European imperialism. The British and the French took over the Muslim countries, colonized the Muslim countries, from Morocco to India. There are, in the past, they were called Orientalists, which are basically non-Muslim scholars of Arabic and historians that studied Islam very deeply, know Arabic very well. In all of their efforts throughout the colonial period, so we're talking about maybe 150 years, and then the post-colonial period up until now, did the British ever produce something like the Quran? It seems like that would be the first thing you would do, right? If you want to undermine the authority of Islam within Muslim societies, prove Islam wrong, prove it's wrong. The British never did it. What about the French? And they had a lot of resources. Think about the resources they had at their disposal, financially, militarily, but also academically. At Oxford University, whatever some big elite university in France is, during this time, they never came with the like of the Quran. Wouldn't that have been the easy route to defeat the Muslims? You don't want any resistance. You don't want any jihad. Just prove to all the Muslims that Islam is false. But they never did it. In the entire colonial era, they never did it. So just reflect on the significance of that. Right, the Catholic Church never had, and it has churches that have native Arabic speakers, right? So the proof, it seems, I mean, it's very simple. The idea of i'jaz is very simple, but it's very profound. And it's within each and every one of us. We are the proof, or really I should say our inability is the proof. And if you want to try it, you're welcome to do so. Allah welcomes it. You know, you can try to do so and see what happens. You won't be able to. And the more you know Arabic, the more that reality sets in. In another ayah, again, the ayat of Tahaddi, أَمْ يَقُولُونَ افْتَرَاهُ قُلْ فَأْتُوا بِسُورَةٍ مِثْلِهِ وَادْعُوا مَنِ اسْتَطَعْتُمْ مِنْ دُونِ اللَّهِ إِن كُنْتُمْ صَادِقِينَ. So again, along the same lines. And this is in Surah Yunus, and it's the 38th verse. Or do they say that he fabricated it? The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he's the one that made it up. Say, then bring a surah like it, that's the same as it, and call whoever you can other than Allah, if you are being truthful. So again, addressing the kafir, the skeptic. If what you're saying is true, if Islam is false, then you bring this. Has anybody done it? No. That's another verse of challenge. Then after that, excuse me, and this is in Surah Hud, the 13th ayah. أَمْ يَقُولُونَ افْتَرَاهُ, or do they say he made it up? قُلْ فَأْتُوا بِعَشْرِ سُوَرٍ مِثْلِهِ مُفْتَرَيَاتٍ وَادْعُوا مَنِ اسْتَطَعْتُمْ مِنْ دُونِ اللَّهِ إِن كُنْتُمْ صَادِقِينَ. So again, we actually should have gone in reverse, but here the challenge is, say, come with 10 surahs that are also made up, and call whoever you can besides Allah if you are truthful. So Allah reduced the challenge, even though we're reading the ayat in the opposite order here. Then in Al-Isra, verse number 88, قُلْ لَئِنِ اجْتَمَعَتِ الْإِنسُ وَالْجِنُّ عَلَىٰ أَنْ يَأْتُوا بِمِثْلِ هَذَا الْقُرْآنِ لَا يَأْتُونَ بِمِثْلِهِ وَلَوْ كَانَ بَعْضُهُمْ لِبَعْضٍ ظَهِيرًا. Say, if human beings, if all of humanity and all of jinn were to gather together, we're working together, all of humanity and all of the jinn are working together to come with the like of this Quran, they could not come with the like of it. Even if they aided one another. Right? Even if you had help from a jinn, you could not do it. All of us together. So that's in Al-Isra. And then, فَلْيَأْتُوا بِحَدِيثٍ مِثْلِهِ إِنْ كَانُوا صَادِقِينَ أَمْ يَقُولُونَ تَقَوَّلَهُ. Or do they say that he fabricated it? It's a fabricated statement. You know. بَلْ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ. Rather, they don't believe. And let them come with a discourse that's like it, if they are telling the truth. Right. So these ayats in Al-Baqarah, Yunus, Hud, Isra, Tur, they all show us what we've been speaking of. These are ayat at-tahaddi. Right. So to go back a little bit, we said that the i'jaz of the Quran is in the combination of its eloquence and its structure, its composition. So it means what? The choice of words and how those words are put together. That's what eloquence and structure means. Eloquence is the choice of words, and the structure is how those words are put together. The combination of those are something that is not within human capacity to produce. Excuse me. So that brings us to, if we want to appreciate the eloquence of the Quran, really have a deeper understanding of how the Quran is a mu'jiza, to really to feel it when you read it or when you hear it. When you, of course, have to know Arabic, but it's not just a basic knowledge of Arabic. There has to be an understanding of what fasaha is, and then also what's called al-balagha. And fasaha, we said it's, excuse me, it's eloquence, and balagha is rhetoric, right? The art or the science of rhetoric. So al-fasaha, what that means, it has 5 conditions for something to be fasih, either a word or a phrase in Arabic. The first is that it has to be in classical Arabic, all right? So it can't have words from other languages, and this is what happened later on in Muslim history. It's called muwallad, right? Different peoples come into Islam and were Arabized, right? And then they brought terms with them. So that cannot, a non-Arabic term cannot qualify as being eloquent in Arabic. So that's the first thing. And then that they be words that are known, whose usage is known, not words that are strange and that nobody knows. And that the words correspond, meaning they express the meaning in the best way. And that they be easy, meaning easy to pronounce, not something that's, that will tie your tongue up, but relatively easy to pronounce and understand. And that the expression fit the meaning exactly, meaning there's no hashul, there's no za'id, there's nothing that is taking the expression outside of the limits of what's needed to get the point across, right? Meaning it's short and sweet, right? Concise. So that's what fasaha is. So when we talk about the fasaha of the Quran, it's not something relative, it's not something subjective, all right? But there are objective standards that we're judging it by, all right? And the same thing goes for al-balagha. So al-balagha, rhetoric, and the Quran is baligh, right? It's very expressive and articulate in its rhetoric. What al-balagha means is mutabaqatul kalam lil-waqi' li-muqtada al-hal. Mutabaqa al-kalami lil-waqi'i li-muqtada al-hal. That is al-balagha. So it's where where speech is corresponding to the situation, meaning whatever it is you're trying to express. Li-muqtada al-hal, according to what the condition dictates, all right? So basically, what does that mean? It's saying the right words in the right place for the right reasons, okay? So if I'm let's say, for example, at a funeral, and I'm going to give a eulogy, the eulogy, in order for it to be baligh by Arabic standards, I have to have a certain tone in the eulogy, all right? So that's what balagha means. The speech corresponds to the tone of the situation. All right? You're expressing what needs to be expressed in the proper manner it needs to be expressed in. Does everybody follow what I mean by that? So if I'm, again, for a eulogy, for example, I'm not going to start cracking too many jokes at a eulogy. Why? Because a eulogy, the situation, the condition calls for something that's of a more serious tone, that's of a more somber tone. All right? So the Quran is like that. When it's speaking about the hellfire, it's using a tone and using words and expressions that create fear. When it's talking about Jannah, it's using words and expressions that make you want to see Jannah. You know, it makes you hope for Jannah, et cetera, et cetera. All right. So that's balagha. And when you study balagha formally, and again, this is something that I encourage those of us that know Arabic to expose yourself to some balagha formally, so that when you read the Quran, you can appreciate just how eloquent it really is. You can really feel the power of it. For those of our brothers and sisters that are native speakers of Arabic and have some Arabic education, when you hear the Quran, you know that it's good, right? You know that it's good Arabic, right? And that's an understatement. You know, the wordings are powerful, and you can feel it. But when you study balagha formally, you can begin to express exactly why that's the case, right? So in balagha, there's 3 different subjects that are studied to understand eloquence and rhetoric. The first is ilm al-ma'ani. Ilm al-ma'ani. And in ilm al-ma'ani, what's the subject? It's adatul kalami ala qadr al-ma'na al-maqsood. It's to present speech according to the exact measure of the meaning that you aim to express. All right? In other words, to state something perfectly. Adatul kalami ala qadr al-ma'na al-maqsood. And that's a subject that is studied formally in ilm al-ma'ani. And then after that, there is ilm al-bayan. Ilm al-bayan. The knowledge of clarification, literally. And ilm al-ma'ani means knowledge of meanings. But knowledge of clarification, ilm al-bayan, or the study of how to articulate, how to clarify what you want to express, it means al-wusulu ila al-ma'na bi turuqin muta'addida. Al-wusul ila al-ma'na bi turuqin muta'addida. It's how to articulate yourself with different styles, in different manners. Right? So it requires what? A knowledge of expertise on how to use the language. That's called ilm al-bayan, the knowledge of how to clarify or how to articulate. And then there's ilm al-badi'. Ilm al-badi'. And what that al-badi' means, it's hard to translate, but it's like innovation. You know, you're making something and it's badi', innovative and well done. So what that means, al-badi', it is تحسين الكلام لفظيا أو معنويا. تحسين الكلام لفظيا أو معنويا. علم البديع, the knowledge of al-badi', how to beautify one's speech and be innovative in one's discourse. It is to tahseen, I already said beautify, right? It's to beautify one's speech, to adorn one's speech, either by way of the words that are used, lafziyan, or by way of the meanings that are intended, aw ma'nawiyan. Right? And the Quran contains all of that. So the more familiar you are with these ulum, al-ma'ani, al-bayan, and al-badi', the more that when you read the Quran or listen to the Quran, the more you can feel and appreciate the fact that it's a mu'jiza, because the language is something else. The language is something else. It's the pinnacle of eloquence, and the style is unique. All right, so with that being said, I'm hoping I'm encouraging those that don't know Arabic to learn Arabic, inshallah. And those that do know Arabic to learn balagha. When it comes to rhetorical devices in the Quran, there are 22 that the scholars mention. So we already know the Quran, all of the words, all of the expressions are fasih. They're eloquent. Meaning, if you look at any word or expression in the Quran, if you look at the entirety of the Arabic language, you won't find a better word to express what Allah is saying with the word that He used. So the Quran is at the pinnacle of fasaha, of eloquence. But then also there's the balagha, all right? Allah has a tone that matches everything that He expresses, whether it be something about Himself and His attributes, whether it be a story, or whether it be descriptions of Jannah and Nar. The tone always matches the situation that's being spoke of. And then you have al-bayan, what's called adawat al-bayan, these rhetorical devices, which we said again are 22 that the scholars have identified. And we don't have time to go into the details of all of them, so we're just going to briefly give a picture. And if we don't get all 22 now, then we'll have to continue next week, on Wednesday, inshallah. So the first thing that's used is al-majaz, which is figurative language. And majaz has a lot of different categories, so we don't have time to get into all of them. But there's metaphors, there's similes, it's called. There's ziyada, nuqsan. So just to give one example, it's called a tashbih, where you're making a resemblance to something, like a simile, we would say in English. ثُمَّ قَسَتْ قُلُوبُهُمْ مِنْ بَعْدِ ذَلِكَ فَهِيَ كَالْحِجَارَةِ أَوْ أَشَدَّ قَسْوَةً. So that's called tashbih, where Allah is saying that their hearts are what? Kal-hijara. Their hearts became hard, and they're hard like what? فَهِيَ كَالْحِجَارَةِ, like stones, or even worse in their hardness. So kal-hijara, that's called at-tashbih, and that's a form of majaz, of figurative language. Their hearts are hard like stones. There's a ton of different categories of al-majaz that unfortunately we don't have time to get into. Then after that, there's what's called al-kinaya. Al-kinaya, and that's a euphemism, all right? So that's where you're speaking about something, but you're not using the word for that thing. You're using something that goes, that comes with that word. Ma yulazimuhu, or something that it entails, right? Without mentioning something explicitly. So that's called al-kinaya. So for example, Allah said, subhanahu wa ta'ala, in reference to Maryam and Isa, alayhim as-salam, كانا يأكلان الطعام. كانا يأكلان الطعام. They used to eat food. Okay, so that's a kinaya to what? What is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala telling us about Isa alayhi salam? And this, of course, is in the context of Allah clarifying that Isa alayhi salam is not worthy of worship. And Isa alayhi salam is not Allah. And He uses that phrase, in kana ya'kulan at-ta'am. They used to eat food. So what is it that Allah is telling us about them? Is He only talking about food? Is that the point of that expression? No. I mean, yes, but also there's more, right? It's a kinaya. He's saying something else by saying that. What is Allah saying? That's a question for y'all. This is a kinaya to what? If I eat food, what does that mean? I eat food. Okay, so what? What does that mean about me? That I have need. All right? That I get hungry. I need nutrients. I need sustenance. May Allah honor you all. I have to produce waste. Okay? I need energy and I produce waste. This is what Allah is saying. So it's a kinaya to those meanings of deficiency within the human being. Okay? Then there's what's called al-iltifats. Al-iltifats. And this also has different, excuse me, this also has different categories. Okay? So iltifat literally means turning. It's when the speaker, the person that's speaking, turns. All right? So, for example, it could go from third person to first person. And this is something that's frequent in the Qur'an. And what is the point of Allah doing this, of switching persons or switching the perspective of who's speaking? It draws your attention to it. All right? So that's called al-iltifat. Next, there's at-tajreed. At-tajreed, which literally means to strip. All right? And that is to mention something in a general sense, and then after that, to give more detail about it in order to honor something that's mentioned, or also to humiliate something that's mentioned, to mock something that's mentioned. Okay? So for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he said, وَمَنْ كَانَ عَدُوَّ اللَّهِ وَمَلَائِكَتِهِ وَرُسُلِهِ وَجِبْرِيلَ عَدُوًّا لِلَّهِ وَمَنْ كَانَ عَدُوًّا لِلَّهِ وَمَلَائِكَتِهِ وَرُسُلِهِ وَجِبْرِيلَ وَمِكَائِيلَ وَمِكَالَ فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ عَدُوٌّ لِلْكَافِرِينَ. So what is it that Allah did subhanahu wa ta'ala in that verse? وَمَنْ كَانَ عَدُوًّا لِلَّهِ وَمَلَائِكَتِهِ وَرُسُلِهِ. Whoever was an enemy to Allah and to the angels and to his messengers. He goes on, and we won't mention it. We'll mention the end of the ayah first. Then Allah is an enemy to the disbelievers. But he mentions, before saying that, who? Who does he mention? Jibreel and Mikael. Who are Jibreel and Mikael? Who are they? That's a question for them. Who are Jibreel and Mikael? They're angels. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala already said, وَمَنْ كَانَ عَدُوًّا لِلَّهِ وَمَلَائِكَتِهِ وَرُسُلِهِ. So he already said, whoever is an enemy to Allah and his angels. So that's a general statement, right? Then he specified Jibreel and Mikael. So then what is the meaning of that expression? It's called, again, at-tajreed. He's honoring Jibreel and Mikael by giving them, like we say, a shout out, a specific mention, even though they're already included in the angels. He wanted to mention them specifically to honor them. All right, so that's called tajreed, where you have someone or something that's included in a general meaning, but then they're specifically pointed out. Then the next is called al-i'tirab. Al-i'tirab. That's the fifth rhetorical device. Al-i'tirab. So this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He will make a statement, and then it's like in English, it's called parentheses. It's called parentheses. So it's like where it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or any speaker, if you're using this device, you're interrupting yourself, right? It's a parenthesis. So a point is made, then that point is interrupted, and then the point that was originally being spoken of is returned to. It's called al-i'tirad, ya'taridu fil kalam. So for example, وَإِنَّهُ لَقَسَمٌ لَوْ تَعْلَمُونَ عَظِيمٌ. What's the original flow of that statement? وَإِنَّهُ لَقَسَمٌ عَظِيمٌ. وَإِنَّهُ لَقَسَمٌ عَظِيمٌ. But there's an i'tirad. وَإِنَّهُ لَقَسَمٌ لَوْ تَعْلَمُونَ عَظِيمٌ. Why does Allah put that? He interjects this لَوْ تَعْلَمُونَ. It's to give us the sense of how tremendous this is. If only you knew. And that's speaking about مواقع النجوم in al-waqi'. All right. وَإِنَّهُ لَقَسَمٌ لَوْ تَعْلَمُونَ عَظِيمٌ. That's called an i'tirad. And this is something that is also frequently used in the Qur'an. Then the sixth one is at-tajnis. At-tajnis. And at-tajnis is where you have a word that's used, it's the same word, but it's used for different meanings. All right. اتفاق اللفظ مع اختلاف المعنى. And this is something also that's used by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran. So for example, وَيَوْمَ تَقُومُ السَّاعَةِ يُقْسِمُ الْمُجْرِمُونَ مَا لَبِثُوا غَيْرَ سَاعَةٍ. So what word is repeated twice in that statement? The day that the Sa'ah is established, the criminals will swear that they didn't remain except for a Sa'ah. Sa'ah and Sa'ah. But in the first usage, Sa'ah means what? It means a Sa'ah, the hour, the Sa'ah, meaning the end of the world, right? وَيَوْمَ تَقُومُ السَّاعَةِ مَا لَبِثُوا غَيْرَ سَاعَةٍ. They swear that they didn't remain except for a Sa'ah, right? So this is called tajnis. You're using the same word, but in each usage of the same word, there's a different meaning that's intended. Then number 7 is al-mutabaqa. Al-mutabaqa. And this is something that's very, very frequent. So I'm not just saying these for my own entertainment. I want y'all in Taraweeh tonight, if you attend Taraweeh and you understand the Arabic, to say, oh yeah, Sheikh Nasser was talking about this, because you're gonna hear it. Right? Sabi', the 7th one is al-mutabaqa. Al-mutabaqa. And what al-mutabaqa, it means correspondence. But what it means in the context of balagha and ilm al-bayan is where you're mentioning things that are opposites, right? You're mentioning things in the same context that are opposites. And this is something that we see a lot in the Quran, all right? Like what? Black and white, life and death, day and night, all right? How many times does Allah mention day and then right after that, night? Or he'll give a description of Jannah, a description of Nar, a description of those that are muttaqun, those that are pious and mindful of Allah, versus disbelievers, right? This is frequent, right? So it's mentioning opposites, right? So I wrote an example here. وَأَنَّهُ هُوَ أَضْحَكَ وَأَبْكَى. Right? Allah, he's the one that causes us to laugh or smile, and he's the one that causes us to cry. Adhaka wa abka. That's called mutabaqa, where you're mentioning opposite things together. Number 8 is al-muqabala. And that's similar to al-mutabaqa. Al-muqabala, it means literally to make things face one another. all right? And so what that means in the context of balagha is where you're combining a number of things, two or more things, for example, descriptions, and then you are comparing them with another group of things. All right? Does everybody understand the difference between mutabaqa and muqabala? So mutabaqa is just you're mentioning opposites, whereas muqabala is like a comparison. Okay? So that especially goes with descriptions of Jannah and Nar. Comparing the state of the people of Jannah versus and then afterwards comparing the state of the people of the Nar. Right? So that's called muqabala. Then after that, number 9 is called mushakala. Mushakala. Which means taking on the same form, literally. So that's where something is mentioned, but it's not intended for the thing in and of itself. It's mentioned in reference to something else as a response. All right, so meaning a particular thing has a form, and then the other thing you mention takes on that form, okay, as a response or correspondence to that thing, okay? So for example, Nasullaha fanasiyahum. Okay. They forgot about Allah, so Allah forgot them. Okay. Does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala literally forget? No. Nisyan, forgetfulness, is not an attribute of Allah. But why does Allah say that? It's for the balagha. It's a rhetorical device. They forgot about Allah, so Allah forgot them. Meaning Allah's not going to pay attention to them. Okay, on the day of resurrection. That's called mushakala. This is also something that Allah mentions in terms of Mecca. Right? Makaru wa makar Allah. They plotted and schemed, and Allah schemed. Right, mushakala. Excuse me. We're on number 10, but we don't have enough time. So we'll mention the other 12, inshallah, and give some examples on Wednesday. Inshallah, everybody got what we were mentioning there for some of those, al-majaz, al-kinaya, al-tajreed, muqabala, mushakala, etc., etc. All right, so, inshallah, appreciate when you come across these rhetorical devices, appreciate them and know what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is intending by the usage of those things. Were there any questions or comments? Today we went a little bit longer. This is a full hour. I'll let those, inshallah, go that want to read with Sheikh Mustafa. Any questions or comments? Everybody got everything we talked about, alhamdulillah?
Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh. Where did you record this, and where can I get it so I can listen to it again?
They are recorded, and inshallah, I'm going to be releasing all of these recordings when we're finished with Ramadan, inshallah, along with some notes as well. Some of them are already on the Facebook page. Yeah, not all of them, but some of the ones we did in the beginning are on the Facebook page. If there weren't any questions or comments, and inshallah, we will see everybody for our last Get to Know the Qur'an on Wednesday, inshallah. Jazakumullah khairan for listening, and inshallah, we benefited and will continue to benefit, inshallah, from the book of Allah. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Wassalamu alaikum.